Around 21, you were diagnosed with a disease. Do you mind saying what happened and then how that impacted your career?
I was diagnosed with vasculitis when I was 24. When I was 21, I graduated and I plunged into my career with my full attention. But I didn't realize that my body couldn't take care of it. Let's say I really had to practice 10 hours a day. And then also I started to teach at Curtis.
It wasn't sustainable,
It was not sustainable. I was paralyzed for several months in the hospital.
Like completely paralyzed?
Complete paraplegic. They didn't think that I was going to survive because it was so bad. I was literally skin over bones. I somehow came through. Anyone would face with these difficult situations is what you choose, whether you face it with despair or you face it with hope.
Do you mind starting by introducing yourself? You can say where you're from and what you're doing in Taiwan.
My name is Meng-Chieh. Grew up actually in Kaohsiung until I was 13 and I went to Philadelphia to study at the world prestigious Curtis Institute of Music, and what I do, I'm a pianist. My parents were both teachers. My mother, she has always been teaching since I was very young. And so I would listen and I would really be kind of magnetized to the piano usually for hours. She didn't know what to do with me. And she didn't want to teach me formally. Officially, I really started at 6 because my family background isn't affluent enough to afford for me to go abroad. Got encouragement from my teacher. She thought, okay, maybe I should study with teachers in Taipei first. So I was here for 2 years, and I think parenting maybe were very different then. I'm grateful actually because they had such open attitude for me to really just venture into the world and let me be the person who is responsible for. And truly, I was the one who actually wanted to go away. So I was the happy kid who was like, who never missed home. I was like, oh yes, I'm now here. I get to see all these wonderful shows in Taipei. And I know they would miss me. My father came once and he slept next to me and then he started crying the next morning and I was like, what's going on? He's like, I can't bear the fact that I left my kid out here on his own and he's grinding his teeth and trying to fight for survival. And I'm like, I don't feel that way. By being able to be independent helped me in my journey as a musician. I think critically.
When you were growing up too, were parents usually very involved in managing their kids' lives? Your parents' approach was much different.
I unfortunately don't see that as much now because of economic factors. So in the last 10, 15 years, you have this huge increase in the tuition of all the big schools. The Asian parents feel like that they are supposed to provide until the end of their studies.
With the expectation that the kid will provide for them.
Correct. Yeah. American culture, that's not expected. This becomes kind of a weird pressure because now the parents also feel like, are they really going to do something? Are they going to be able to make it? And then they start to tell the kids, oh no, you can only do this, you can only do that. I was just very lucky because my parents were so supportive without so much pressure. So many things happened when I was young where, I won 全省 competitions. That's how I was allowed actually to go abroad because back then there were strict rules because we were all required for military service. My teacher thought, oh, you should try this school for these geniuses. So I didn't know anything about it. I just followed my teacher's instructions. I just went and I got in.
At that point, you were like 13. Did you know how to speak English?
Certainly got better, especially when I got there because I then was in the high school there. I went to a Quaker school.
You went to Quaker school. Whoa. Getting adjusted to high school life in the States seemed to be quite natural for you.
I didn't feel like the pressure if I were here. It would have been 联考, 高考, all kinds of stuff. The workload as a ninth grader seems so far easier than the ones where in the math, we're like, you guys don't know how to do this? It's like pass without even having to study too much.
What do you feel like the advantages and disadvantages of each schooling system are?
I think that's interesting. The system itself helps kids to be more disciplined and they can show the precocious side a lot earlier. But the cram school culture is not necessarily the way that I think one develops into an artist. You can be a very efficient technician In order to be an artist, I think you have to have time in your life where you can think freely. And so what's interesting for me, especially as an educator that I've observed throughout the years, a lot of Asian kids that are ahead of American kids because they were so well trained to do a certain thing when they were young. But somehow when they get past 16, 17, all of a sudden that artistic ability just doesn't develop. I think more in the, especially last 20 years, the Asian mentality is that, oh God, we can send our kids to be, let's say like Lang Lang, who is world famous, and then lots of endorsement and all that. In some ways, they are the unwilling party. And when you go through life like that, I think at age 20, you become a little bit passive. Whereas kids in American culture, they have always been raised, okay, you do whatever you think. I'm not going to pressure you. If you like it, you do it. They may be lacking a little bit more discipline, but somehow their artistic ability start to blossom after 16. They have a certain willingness to become an artist. They're just like, oh no, this is what we want for our life. Luckily, because my parents didn't pressure me, I got to just do what I really loved.
Like, I feel kind of envious in a way that you had this calling when you were super young.
That also is also unusual.
Yeah.
I always tell people there is a defining moment, especially when I was 9. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I mean, I think for a lot of successful professionals, I feel like that they know somehow when they're very young, and somehow there is an inner guidance that pulls them through that journey.
I remember there was this idea going around, like if you do something for 10,000 hours, you become a master.
Yes.
What's your take on that? And like, what's your take on talent?
Well, at least I live by that.
Yeah?
That's, again, our culture. It's not necessarily repetition alone. It has to be repetition and a certain focus or a certain belief that you are achieving something. I have told my students constantly, even if you practice 10,000 times, but your mind is not there, it's not going to do anything. You know, when you say you have to do it 10,000 times, it becomes tedious. Even just do it 10 times or 20 times musically, it's not that easy. That basically tests your passion, your motivation.
To do something
Always with intention. You know, I see kids who are like 16, and I keep saying to them, if music is really not your calling, it's not too late. Being a dentist, you're not late. Being an engineer, not at all. But they think that they have to keep on. I can only think of it as coming from the parents, the pressure that they received. I think it's rather sad.
Yeah, it's just not meant to be.
Right, it's just not meant to be.
But there is still value in having musical training.
Oh, absolutely. Because somebody who is multilingual has a brain that is much more intricate than somebody who only knows one language. And so music is just one such language that is just so complicated. You know, when a kid goes through training of classical music, they will do well in other areas as well. They're able to consider more options. Their decision making are clearly different. They would seek out collaboration in order to execute something. And the problem with today's society, I think, because of economic crises, we have to cut budget as well for the arts. But you see, America has done that long ago, where the schools have no art classes anymore.
Yeah, look what America's like now.
Well, that's why it can be scary, because those impact our personality, our decision making.
Everything becomes too pragmatic.
Too single focus, right? Profit, success, rather than whether it's good for the mankind. I hope by putting this on, I'm not going to be like, somebody's going to come and put me in jail.
Subversive.
Yeah, I'm like subversive thoughts. Right? I'm hoping that it doesn't seem subversive, because I feel like it's beneficial for people to understand what music can do.
I don't really know if there's an English word for this, but I hear it in Chinese sometimes, like 素养.
素养. It's one how you have passed a certain education. It's kind of like you are transformed. So most classical music is much more, the process is much more thoughtful than just putting one or two instruments together.
Yeah, guitar, bass, drums.
Right. There's a certain refinement that those composers had put through. Oftentimes by listening to great music, we can feel certain things. You know, just like what you said about reading books. If it's a book written by some very powerful mind, you know that there is a message and there is an experience that the writer obviously wants to tell you. But if you just choose to read 7 days of news, you're not going to be transformed.
What would be your kind of advice to someone that wants to try to start appreciating this type of music?
go with their heart. For example, there are people who are more gravitated towards opera, maybe because there's a plot, or a certain instrument. Maybe they like the sound of flute. I think any really well-written classical music would have a message and it would help you to develop a certain kind of sophistication.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.